Friends. It was an average day. All the kids were helping put stuff away, making sure Kiba didn't touch anything fragile or important when the door rang. That's weird. Mom shouldn't be coming home today. Izuku went to open the door and was shocked at what was on the other side. "Hello, young Midoriya," greeted All Might in his skinny form. "Sorry for the intrusion." Ochako apologized, popping out from behind the deflated hero. Izuku's attention was immediately drawn to Ochako, as dozens of thoughts flew through his head. The most prominent being: 1. Oh my god, there's a girl in my house. Ignoring the fact she was only standing outside it. 2. Oh my god, what is she wearing? Noting that she was in workout gear, showing off her physique to the now heavily embarrassed green team. And 3. Oh my god, she looks exhausted. It was very clear the girl had been through a rigorous workout. She was panting heavily and was absolutely covered in sweat, and her posture suggested that she was barely standing. In his head was a battle between his awkward socially anxious side and his noble wanting to help side. In the end, his helpful side won. "Are you okay? You look exhausted." "Me? I'm fine. Although I would appreciate it if I could have some water, and also come in to cool down and rest a bit." Ochako blushed at having to ask someone she barely knew for all that. Young Uraraka worked out a bit too hard. I tried carrying her back myself, but too many saw me in my hero form and I had to find a place to hide and for young Uraraka to rest. And your home was the closest place we could go. All Might explained. "Well, come in, please." Izuku ushered them both in. Izuku brought both of them to the couch, where they immediately collapsed. "Oh god, my legs feel numb." Ochako groaned. "My lungs feel like they're popping out of my ribs." Izuku brought her a bottle of water. "Here. Thank you so much." Ochako took the bottle and poured it into her mouth. She drank so fast, she actually started choking for a moment, before recovering. All Might looked around and immediately noticed the small pink-haired girl, hiding behind a box and glaring very intensely at the two of them. "Hello there." All Might greeted her, giving a small wave. In response, the girl hid herself completely behind the box. "I know I look rather frightening in this form, but that girl seems to really dislike me." All Might thought. "Young Midoriya, I see you found another child." All Might chuckled. "Are you sure your quirk is not attracting small children?" "Oh. You must mean Kyoku." "Well, honesty, she found us." Izuku awkwardly rubbed the back of his head. "And by that, he means she broke into our house, used her quirk on us, and begged for affection." Fu summarized. "What?" All Might and Ochako said simultaneously. "It was a whole thing, you don't need to worry about it," Izuku told them. "At this rate, you might as well just put up a sign that says, 'Children, come here.'" Ochako laughed for a moment, before stopping, realizing what she just said, and blushing in embarrassment. "Never mind, that wouldn't end well." "And it's kinda unnecessary," Izuku said. "Soon the government is going to start giving me kids anyway." There was a short pause, as All Might and Ochako gave Izuku a confused look. "Again. Every time I see you, it seems I always end up more and more baffled," young Midoriya. All Might said. Ochako nodding in agreement. Sorry," Izuku said, afraid that he had offended them somehow. "No, it's fine. If anything, I'm glad that you're being so active and that your life is changing in positive ways." All Might said, not really sure if the latest change in Izuku's life was positive due to lack of information. "So are you taking care of kids professionally now?" Ochako inquired. "Well, yes, but it's not that simple." Izuku got ready to explain his bizarre situation. He was sure glad most of the kids were in the other parts of the house. You see, all of the kids I bumped into are classified as O.P.Cs. That stands for overly powerful children. It means that their quirks make them dangerous to be around and that they require special care in order to live with. Like 13. Ochako pointed out. Yeah, like them. They might have even been part of the program now that I think about it. Izuku agreed. I'll have to ask Mamie about it. So all these kids have dangerous quirks? All Might asked. In one way or another, Izuku said. Kei turns people to stone when they look at her eyes. And Kiba requires human blood for both her quirk to work and to live. And even without that stipulation, you've seen how dangerous her quirk is on its own. Yeah, Ochako said, remembering the car throwing incident. Normally, when a parent thinks their child is an OPC, they're supposed to call the O.P.C.C. That stands for Overly Powerful Children Containment and Care. They're a branch of the government that is supposed to help take care of OPCs. That name is terrible, Ochako said bluntly. Also, I've never heard of them before. I have, although I haven't heard a lot of good things about them. All Might recalled. Yeah, they used to be a lot more prevalent than they are now, but they were also a lot crueler than they are now. Izuku looked up a lot of information about the O.P.C.C. After all, they were the people he was directly working with. However, a lot of the things they were doing blew up in their faces and resulted in them losing a lot of power and funding, resulting in them being nearly unheard of today. And due to most people not knowing about them, most parents don't know how to deal with their kids when their quirks are too dangerous. Most parents try to deal with it and end up getting injured or worse. But some parents, they just give up and abandon their kids. If the kids are lucky, they end up at an orphanage and then are quickly picked up by the O.P.C.C. But other parents just throw their children onto the streets. All Might finished a dark look in his eye. From what you told me, all these children, with the exception of young Eri, had suffered that fate. And Eri suffered even worse. How could someone just throw away their child like that? Ochako said in outrage. Sometimes it's even worse. The OPCCC has also had to remove several children from their parents due to several types of child abuse. I've read about villains who'll kidnap people and force them to breed in order to sell their children with powerful quirks. Izuku remembered almost throwing up when he read that. He thought quirk marriages were bad, but this was on a whole other level. That's horrible. Ochako said, standing up so fast she hurt herself. Ow. Indeed. As a future pro-hero, these are the types of things you'll have to fight against young Uraraka. All Might said. Ochako nodded, a fire burning in her eyes. When I get my hands on those monsters, I'm going to throw them into the sun. While they may deserve it, I would ask that you don't kill them, if you don't need to. All Might added. And I would also appreciate it if you didn't, advocate murder in front of the kids, Izuku asked her nervously. Oh, sorry. Ochako apologized, sitting back down and returning to a more calm state. I think I got a bit sidetracked, I just got so angry when I heard about that, Izuku explained. It's fine, young Midoriya, your outrage is more than justified. All Might remembered back when he first encountered his first instance of child abuse. It wasn't pretty, both what the abuser did to the child, and what All Might did to the abuser once he found him. But back to what I was saying, due to the lack of public knowledge about the O.P.C.C., it leads to many kids with dangerous quirks either roaming the streets or being taken by villains. Izuku continued. And because of the OPCCC's lack of funding and power, they could only do so much. And that's how you met all these kids, right? Ochako asked. Most of them, yes, Izuku said. But I'm different. Considering you managed to find 7 children in under a year, I would say so. All Might pointed out. Well yeah, but that's not what I'm talking about, Izuku told him. The O.P.C.C.C also has issues when it comes to finding where to keep the children they find. Due to their dangerous quirks, they can't go to a normal orphanage, so they either have to find someone to adopt the kids themselves and support them with special equipment, or they have to keep them in special O.P.C.C.C's facilities until they can support themselves. And I'm guessing a good portion of those kids raised in a cold and sterile government facility don't grow up with the greatest opinion on people. All Might added. He knew that most villains were created by crappy childhoods, and this sounded like one of those cases. Unfortunately, there is a non-negligible amount of kids raised in those facilities ended up as villains, Izuku revealed. Then why don't they just focus on finding families to adopt them? Ochako was getting fired up again. I doubt it's that simple. All Might told her. If these children's quirks are so dangerous that the government has to intervene like this, then it's unlikely that many people would be willing to take them in at the risk of their own safety. And the ones who do sometimes are killed or maimed accidentally by the child they took in. Izuku elaborated. They tried handing out money as an incentive, but that just caused some people to accept and use the money on themselves and mistreated the children, and as a result, the OPCCC took the child back into their custody. And as a result, most kids acquired by the OPCCC simply stay in their custody. Because of this, the OPCCC was deemed ineffective and had their funding cut even more, making the issues even worse. So it's just one big mess. All Might noted. And all those poor kids are suffering because of it, Ochako added, looking extremely frustrated. I swear the only things as bad as villains are politicians. All Might grumbled, always having hated dealing with the red tape and the men in suits. However, since I kept taking in kids that are labeled as OPCs, they saw an opportunity and they made me an offer, Izuku said. They asked me to start an organization in league with the government and the OPCCC specifically, that takes in the OPCs and adopts them. It's like an orphanage, but you can't adopt anyone, and all the children have dangerous quirks. Really? But you're still in school. Ochako pointed out, her eyes wide as dinner plates. Not really, I kinda stopped going to school. Izuku said slowly, afraid it would color their opinions of him in a bad way. What? Why? Aren't afraid of falling out? Ochako asked, looking at him curiously and making the boy look away from her, not used to attention, or at least good attention. While I am glad something is being done about this, I would have thought they would have picked someone more qualified for the position. All Might said, before quickly realizing he made an error when Izuku's face fell. Not that you're bad for the job. You got. All Might felt a small hand slap him hard in the back of his skull. He looked behind him and saw Kyoko glaring at him like he just killed her dog in front of her from behind the couch, standing on a box so she could reach his head. Is something wrong, All Might? Izuku asked. No, I'm fine. All Might didn't want to get her in trouble, it was rather rude of him to say that after all. Continue. Well, I see why you'd think that. The only thing that really qualifies me for this job is that I'm the only one who wants to do it. Izuku explained. And the O.P.C.C.C is very desperate for something to work, so they're purposely overlooking a lot of things that could keep me from getting this job. If it works out, then they could show their progress to their superiors, and hopefully, they can get an increase in funding, meaning they can put more money into making their existence known and into collecting the children. I mean, that's great and all, I'm sure it'll help a lot of kids, but are you sure it's a good idea to have a bunch of kids with life-threatening quirks all under the same roof being taken care of by one teenager is a good idea? Ochako asked. She was glad something was being done about what was apparently a massive issue she wasn't aware of until now, but the solution seemed kinda desperate and rushed. There are a lot of safety precautions. And the place we're moving has a bunch of security precautions in it. Izuku explained. And they are requiring me to study certain topics, and get a license in quirk consoling. And I'll also be in charge of hiring other staff. It's not a perfect solution, but it's better than nothing. I mean, you're right, but are you sure you're gonna be okay? If one of those kids could accidentally kill you, then how are you gonna handle lots of them? Ochako asked, more out of concern for his safety than anything else. It is still pretty dangerous, but someone has to do it. And no one else is willing to do it, so I have to. Izuku explained simply. It's the only thing I can really do. It was then that Ochako noticed that look in his eyes. The one that All Might had been noticing the entire time. It was a sad look, desperate for purpose. Before anyone could continue the conversation, the rest of the kids ran into the room. Caretaker, we finished. Oh. It's you too. Kiba said, remembering them immediately. We have guests. Kei ran into the room to look at the unusual event. Sansan stretched into the room and immediately started inspecting Ochako and All Might, stretching her head around the two of them. Oh, it's the Goo girl. Ochako recognized the child. If I recall, her color was pink before. All Might said, trying to back away from Sansan due to him still thinking she was made of acid. Her name's Sansan, and you don't have to worry about the acid. The OPCCC gave me some chemicals that when mixed with her acid, neutralizes it temporarily, so it's okay to touch her, Izuku said. Ochako, out of curiosity, decided to touch Sansan's with her palms. It's like touching jello. Reacting to the touch, Sansan wrapped herself around Ochako's entire body and nuzzled her cheek. Sansan! Izuku cried out, unsure how she would react to being covered in slime. No, don't take her off, this feels amazing. Ochako replied, Sansan's cold gooey body doing wonders for Ochako's tired overheated one. Oh, okay. I'll have to keep that in mind. Izuku made a mental note of this. Looks like we're all here. Except Eri. Fu pointed out. Wait, where's Eri? Izuku looked around the white-haired girl. I need to go find Eri, could you give me a moment? Izuku skittishly excused himself as he left to look for Eri, leaving the two of them alone with the rest of the kids. Where's Kyoko? Kei asked. She's hiding in the kitchen. Fu ratted her out. Hey! Kyoko shouted from the kitchen, still hiding. She doesn't like outsiders, Kiba explained. She thinks that anyone not part of the family is a bunch of evil savages. Which is ridiculous, censured Dash. Before Kiba could spill the beans on All Might's secret, Fu did his signature, Kiba shut up, move of shoving his fingers into her mouth and snapping them off using her teeth. Seriously disturbing All Might and Ochako before seeing him grow back those fingers, and remembering what his quirk was. That is understandable. I'm sure she's seen a lot of hardships. All Might said. You have no idea, Kiba said, spitting out all the fingers. I found her. Izuku came into the room, holding Eri. She's really shy, so she probably won't talk much. Sorry, Eri muttered an apology. No, it's okay. Ochako gave the girl a reassuring smile, but made no effort to move out of Sansan's slime cocoon. My name is Ochako Uraraka. Nice to meet you. Eri paused for a moment before she gathered the will to respond. I'm Eri Midoriya. Izuku always felt a weird spark of happiness and pride whenever one of the kids referred to themselves as a Midoriya, only enhanced by the pride he felt at Eri introducing herself. And without stuttering. Beep, beep, beep. Izuku took his phone out of his pocket and looked at it, his eyes widening. Oh. Sansan, it's time we need to go. Can't she stay a little longer? Ochako groaned as Sansan very slowly oozed off of her. Sorry, but I need to reapply the chemical to her body, otherwise she'll turn back into acid in 15 minutes. Never mind, then you can go. Ochiko's eyes widened in fear at the thought of being covered in acid. All Might looked at his watch. Speaking of going, young Uraraka, I believe it's time we took out leave. Oh, okay. Ochiko winced as she got off the couch. Thank you for letting us rest here. Ochiko gave him a polite bow of thanks. It's nothing. Izuku blushed and stammered. And also, I think what you're doing is a real good thing. Ochiko gave him a bright, pleasant smile that made Izuku's head short-circuit. Please take care of these children the best you can. You don't need to tell him that, Kiba remarked. Caretaker is the best at his work. Aye. Izuku breathed in deeply, regaining his composure. I'll do my best. We know you will, young Midoriya. All Might and Ochiko started to leave, but before walking out the door, All Might turned to Izuku and said one more thing. I told you there was more than one way to be a hero. I'm glad you found yours. And with that, they left. Izuku sniffed, trying to let as few tears slip as possible. Isuso? Sanson looked at him in concern. I'm okay, Sanson. Izuku wiped away the tears. I'm okay. A few minutes later, with All Might and Ochiko, the duo walked down the street in relative peace. Now that Ochiko had gotten some rest, she could walk all the way to her house without All Might assistance. So, what do you think of young Midoriya? All Might asked her. He's nice. Ochiko responded almost instantly. But, he also seems kinda sad. And like he's hiding something from me. It's like when my parents tried to hide all the bills from me when I was little so I wouldn't worry about it. Well, that's not far from the truth. All Might sighed. Young Uraraka, I would like to ask a favor of you. A favor? Ochiko repeated. Yes, I know I shouldn't be messing around with your social life, but, could you be friends with young Midoriya? All Might requested. Sure. Ochiko agreed. She probably would have befriended him herself. He was a really nice guy after all, and he genuinely wanted to help people. And there was also that mysterious sadness that lingered over him that Ochiko both wanted to figure out and dispel. But there was one thing bothering her about this. All Might, how did you and Midoriya become friends? Ochiko asked him. He doesn't really seem like the type of person you would, you know, be friends with. All Might finished for her. Well, it's a long story. And one I'll have to ask you not to tell anyone. Don't worry. At this point, I'm used to keeping your secrets. Ochiko half jokes. All Might actually chuckled at that, before getting serious. Well, to begin, my meeting with Midoriya was pure chance. I was chasing a villain and said villain attacked Midoriya. I saved him, but I noticed my time was running out, so naturally, I jumped away to try and keep anyone from seeing me. However, young Midoriya grabbed my leg as I was taking off. He did what? Ochiko's eyes went wide. That's really dangerous. Indeed. And I told him as much when we landed. Midoriya was determined to ask me a question, however. But before he could ask it, I had run out of time and reverted back to this form. All Might continued. Oh, so that's how he knows about your skinny form. Ochiko said. But what question was so important that he would risk his life to ask you? All Might paused for a bit, before gritting his teeth and continuing. He asked me if he could become a hero without a quirk. There was a long pause as Ochiko took in that question, her face eventually settling into a confused squint. What? Why would he want to not use his quirk? Is his quirk dangerous or lackluster or something? No. Unfortunately, it's not as simple as that. All Might gave Ochiko a serious look. As I said, you're not to tell anyone about this. And please don't let Midoriya know I told you this, but, young Midoriya, is quirkless. Achiko blinked, giving All Might a blank stare, then eventually, her eyes widened like dinner plates in shock. What? Yes, unfortunately, Midoriya is part of the 20% of people without quirks. And the even smaller 4% of children born without quirks in the modern day. All Might explained. That's... Achiko had never even considered him being quirkless. It was such a rare thing, especially for people their age and in their country, that the thought just never occurred to her. Not having a quirk, Achiko thought about what that would be like. Having no powers, in general, would suck, but on top of that being surrounded by people with powers would suck even more. She can only imagine the bullying that must have happened to him. Judging by that expression, you've likely started thinking about what it must be like, being quirkless. All Might told her. Why yeah. Poor Midoriya. She muttered. But, what did you say? You didn't tell him no, did you? All Might looked away from her. Achiko looked at him in disbelief. You didn't say he couldn't be a hero, right? All Might kept his gaze pointed elsewhere, not wanting her to see the shame on his face or the guilt in his eyes. I've seen villains take down buildings with ease. I've seen countless powerful heroes die. And I've nearly been defeated myself. And he was a skinny, young teen without a quirk. You told him no. It wasn't a question. Achiko had figured it out and was looking at the hero like he'd just killed a puppy. Yes. All Might confirmed, still looking away. The two of them had stopped walking. And there was a long, long pause, with no sound but the wind between them. Eventually, Achiko spoke up. All Might, please look at me. All Might froze for a second, before looking at her. Achiko was giving him a furious, scolding glare. That was the wrong answer. Her tone was dead serious and left little room for argument. In spite of that, All Might tried to defend himself. I was concerned for his safety, so I dash. You crushed his dreams, Achiko said bluntly. All Might sighed. I can't really put it any other way. Yes, I crushed his dreams. How could you? Achiko glared at him. You're the #1 hero. Do you know how much your word means to people? He must have been crushed. I wasn't thinking. I've made a bad habit of doing whatever I think needs to be done, without worrying about the consequences afterward. All Might said. There are many times where I've saved lives because of that way of thinking, and there are times where I wish I had just stopped and thought about what I was doing. This is one of those cases. Achiko kept glaring at the hero, shaming him for what he had done. Achiko kept glaring at the hero, shaming him for what he had done. I didn't know the effect it had on him until much later. All Might continued. I had heard that the heroes had finally gathered enough evidence to raid the Yakuza's base and arrest them. I decided to assist, and by some coincidence the person that had managed to get the evidence, and as such was now under witness protection, was Midoriya. Oh yeah, you did tell me about that before, but you never explained it, Achiko said. All Might nodded. The Yakuza had been keeping young Eri captive, but she managed to escape and, seeking somewhere to hide, fled to Midoriya's home. Midoriya allowed the girl in, and when the leader of the Yakuza, Overhaul, broke into his house with some of his thugs, Midoriya hid her under dirty laundry, set his phone to record anything that happened in the room, and then put on a pair of headphones and pretend to sleep. That's smart. Achiko pointed out. That's really clever. Saving a little girl and finding a way to win even with a huge disadvantage. It's almost like a hero. All Might felt that jab in his deflated gut. I know. All Might admitted. I was shocked, but even more so when I read his background report. It all seemed off. It said he got into fights often and his test scores were only ever below average. That doesn't seem right at all. Achiko may not have known Izuku for long, but she was pretty sure that was false. You're right. Later, I found that Fat Gum was doing an investigation on Midoriya's high school. Apparently, he had a run-in with Midoriya as well at some point, and caught a whiff of quirk discrimination. All Might revealed. I of course added my 2 cents and joined in on the investigation. Quirk discrimination. Achiko scowled. She hated the thought of someone being picked on or shunned even though they didn't do anything wrong. Bullies always pissed her off. It took a while for us to find anything, everyone was rather tight-lipped. Until we found one teacher who seemed to be sympathetic to Midoriya's situation, and she told us everything under the agreement that we would keep her anonymous. What we found was a lot worse than what we expected. All Might's face turned grim. Apparently all the stuff on Midoriya's record was bunk. Midoriya was picked on and beaten many times, and the teachers lied saying Midoriya was the one picking the fights, in order to excuse his injuries. What? The teachers were in on it too. Achiko shouted. All Might nodded. They allowed the other students to physically and verbally assault Midoriya on a daily basis, going from destroying his property, giving him mild injuries, to even using their quirks on him. Why? What kind of teacher lets that happen? Those are all crimes. Achiko was outraged. Today was already filled with upsetting news, and now it just kept piling up. Ack. What is wrong with people? Apparently many of the teachers thought it wasn't worth it to ruin the futures of children for a quirkless runt. All Might repeated what they said in disgust. They also lowered his grades. They said if he scored too high, the other children would assault him. They acted like it was some kind of protection. They only hurt him because they let them. Achiko shouted. And the bullying from the other children was out of control. Even going to the point of telling him to commit suicide. All Might was steaming, literally, as his anger caused One for All to activate and transform him into his buff form for a moment. Achiko was speechless and fuming. She wanted to float those bullies into space right now. Heck, she knew where they were, she just might. Scum. Any teachers that actually tried to stop this activity were heavily admonished, and even had their jobs threatened. Meaning they couldn't do anything but watch. And any children that showed sympathy towards Midoriya were targeted as well. All Might continued. After getting that confession, we managed to do some more serious interrogation on the rest of the staff and the students. I managed to convince a friend of mine with a lie detecting quirk to join the case, so we got a lot of the details out of him. Including the fact that this behavior was not exclusive to his middle school, and that Midoriya had been enduring this since he was diagnosed as quirkless. You mean? Achiko's voice was quiet. He's been living like this since he was 5? All Might nodded. Suddenly Achiko felt like she'd been using her quirk too much again. But this time rather than nausea, she felt pure horror and disgust. We also discovered that the main tormentor, Katsuki Bakugo, was admitted into the hero program at UA shortly before the investigation was launched. All Might explained. And you expelled him. Achiko couldn't believe someone like that had the nerve to try out for the hero program. Well, about that. All Might hesitated. He did get the highest score for the practical exam, as well as getting very high marks on the written exam. And he's been bullying someone for 10 years. Achiko shouted. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. UA was actually going to let a bully, a long-time bully at that, attend the hero course. Well, his expulsion was discussed, and many of the school staff did want to follow through with it. The suits ultimately were against it and managed to convince Nizu against it. All Might explained. The suits? Achiko asked. You know, the guys in suits? The ones in high positions who make the impotent discussions dispute the fact that they rarely have to deal with the consequences. There was an obvious disdain in his voice as he explained this. Those guys. They said that a student with such high potential should not be expelled for some easily ironed out behavioral issues. And instead, they suggested other consequences, such as correctional therapy, limiting the benefits he gets from the hero course, exclusion from the sports festival, etc. So far, the only thing that has been decided is that he's not going to be expelled. Ochako was fuming. It's like the entirety of today was dedicated to making her hate the world. I swear if that guy is in my class, I am going to float him into the sun. Please don't. I know it's tempting to take matters into your own hands, especially if you think everyone else is messing things up, but please trust us to handle this. All Might told her. Believe me when I say if he tries anything like what he's been doing again, he'll be thrown out immediately. That doesn't get rid of 10 years of bullying. Ochako shouted. Most of the worst things in her life had only lasted for, at longest, a month or so, well except for the poverty, but at least she had a plan for that. You can't plan to get rid of discrimination or quirklessness. To be fair, neither does expelling Bakugo. All Might pointed out. Bakugo will receive punishments for his actions, and besides, if we expelled him, you wouldn't get the chance to punch him during hero training. Ochako paused. She did really like the idea of beating the hell out of this guy, and since it seemed she really wouldn't be able to change anything, that seemed like a good consolation prize. Just try not to hurt him too much. All Might winked. I make no promises, Ochako said with a worrying amount of seriousness. Ochako sighed and looked up at the sky. The sun was setting, and she needed to get home soon. I know I disappointed you, and believe me I have many regrets. All Might didn't even tell her about him finding out about Midoriya's behavior after they met. Her opinion of him was probably low enough as it was. And I have no right to ask you this, but please help me clean up my mess and assist Midoriya. Oh, I am disappointed, but I'm definitely going to help Midoriya. Ochako declared. For both him and those kids' sake. The old hero smiled at his successor. This is exactly why I chose her. Thank you, young Uraraka. Later that night, as Izuku was getting ready to put the kids to bed, Kyoku asked him a question. Daddy? Why do you still like All Might after he said you couldn't be a hero? All the other children were asleep, so she could talk about this out loud without anyone hearing about it. Well, All Might didn't tell me that to be mean, Kyoku. He said it because he wanted me to be safe. Izuku tried to explain it to her, hiding the pain that question brought him deep inside himself. Being a hero is dangerous after all, and well, he didn't think a quirkless person could do it. Kyoku pouted. While she personally had not been a victim of quirk discrimination, her brother, sisters, and father had been to some extent, and that was enough for her to hate it in its entirety. Well, yes. Izuku winced. He couldn't really phrase it any other way. But it's not like he could have done anything about it. He can't just give me a quirk. But he could though. Kyoku protested. Izuku gave her a confused look. What do you mean? Kyoku stood up in the bed, moving carefully towards Izuku, trying not to wake any of her siblings, leaned in, and whispered something in Izuku's ears. Just missed him. Katsuki Bakugo was absolutely pissed. He aced both the practical and physical exam, because of course he did, and was naturally accepted into UA. The only problem was, rather than tell him this over an email, letter, or something, Mizu himself along with some other UA staff showed up at his doorstep. Apparently, they had found out about what he did to Deku and were not pleased. And neither was his mother. They had scolded him harshly for his actions and told him that if he ever did anything resembling these actions again, then he would be immediately expelled and it would be unlikely he would ever be accepted into another one, given that many of his past actions were now on his record. He would also be excluded from the sports festival and would be on very thin ice during his time at UA. And that punishment could almost be considered light in comparison to what his mother did to him. On top of him now having bruises that would probably last for a good long while, he was also grounded for a year. And so now Bakugo was walking up to Izuku's house to give him a piece of his mind, and to take a piece out of him. Of course, given what he was just told, any logical person would know that this is a horrible idea, and if anyone found out about this, then his hero career would be over before it started. However, Bakugo's mind was too filled with rage, and so no logic made its way in. As far as he was concerned, Deku had ruined his perfect record and his perfect origin story. Bang 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 bang. DKU. Katsuki shouted as he pounded on Izuku's door. He knocked on the door for a couple of minutes, getting no response. Getting even more pissed off, he eventually just kicked the door open. DKU. Get out here. He shouted at the top of his lungs. He looked around and noticed that Deku wasn't there. In fact, nothing was there. His rage blinded him to the house's emptiness, however, and he marched his way over to Izuku's room. He kicked open Izuku's door, ready to potentially maim the boy in question. Only for there to be nobody there. And much like the rest of the house, the entire room was empty. What the fuck? Why the hell is it empty? The only way this room would be fucking empty is if Bakugo's eyes widened as he came to realization. He moved. He fucking moved. For a few moments, Bakugo stood in silence. And then the rage came. Fuck.